Well, nice to meet everyone. My name's Anita. I am a registered dietitian, and I am so sorry I could not be there in person with all of you. I was so looking forward to it, but as most of you are too familiar with chronic illness comes unpredictability and last minute. I was unfortunately unable to travel, but thank you, technology, and that I'm still able to give this presentation to all of you, and I'm excited to be here today. So thank you for having me. So about me, I'm a dietitian, as I said, originally from Michigan. I graduated from Michigan State. Go Green. I currently work as an outpatient dietitian. I primarily work with those that have rare, complex chronic illness, also some eating disorder work in there as well. So a big variety of diagnoses. As I mentioned, I'm also a fellow SPOONY chronic illness fighter. I don't have periodic paralysis, but I do have several other diagnoses that really impact my quality of life, and diet does play a huge role in that, which is part of the reason why I got so interested into nutrition in the first place. When I'm not working, I like to take naps, play with my dog Josie. You can see corner right there, bake, and listen to Taylor Swift. And yes, I've already listened and analyzed multiple times to the new album. So, all right. So, to give us a little roadmap for today, we're going to talk a little bit about the difference between a registered dietitian versus nutritionist, talk about hypo and hyper, periodic paralysis, Anderson-Tawil syndrome, a little note on eating disorders and bad diets and GLP-1s. And then we're going to do some sort of education a little bit, some more interactive with some handouts that you all should have on reading a food label, how to keep a food diary, tips and tricks, and then advocating for yourself. So we got a packed 30 minutes here. So the top three takeaways, if there's nothing else you get from this talk, I really hope that you understand the role that diet plays in the management of periodic paralysis, be able to correctly read a food label, and feel confident about keeping a food diary or food journal. So what's the difference between a dietitian and nutritionist anyways? I thought I would start here with a common question. I get this question all the time. And I think a lot of the times these words are used really interchangeably. Um, but as you can see here, there are some pretty key differences, mainly being that dietitians were licensed, were regulated. There's the strict undergrad we have to do, and then an internship, a board exam, now a master's. Whereas for a nutritionist, it's not regulated at all. Like, sort of anyone could take a nutrition class and call themselves a nutritionist. And so, to put it simply, anyone can call themselves a nutritionist. Not everyone can call themselves a dietitian. And if you are going to seek nutrition support for your periodic paralysis or any other medical condition, please have it be from a registered dietitian and not a nutritionist. I mean, I can just speak from my own experience, and that a registered dietitian is using the most up-to-date, evidence-based, science-backed facts and treatments and knowledge. And so hope that clears any confusion up. But if there are more questions on that, happy to answer them. But why do I need a dietitian? I don't want another provider. Totally valid and understandable. You're already managing a big care team. Why would you want to throw another person in there? Nutrition is super individualized. And if you have a chronic illness like periodic paralysis or even some other sort of chronic illness that influences your life, diet can be helpful, but can also be such a trigger for symptoms. And so it's super important to figure out what sets off your symptoms and what doesn't, and, what works for you. And so, working with a dietitian, you'll be able to really, really individualize your diet, your treatment plan for your individual case of periodic paralysis. Because, as we know, every human with periodic paralysis is a little bit different. Um, I do hate to break it to you, though, that you likely will not find a dietitian that knows about periodic paralysis. But don't fear, don't fret. That is okay. What you need to do is look for a dietitian who is willing to learn and work with you and your doctors and your care team to find what works best for your body. So they might not know the ins and outs of exactly what periodic paralysis is, but if you go to them and are like, hey, I really need help knowing how much sodium, how much potassium, how many grams of carbs I can have in a day, they will be able to help you figure that out. You can also provide them with this one pager of resources, which I believe you all should have. And for the virtual folks, I know that's on the app as well. But I created this, well, it's a 2-pager. It's not a 1-pager, I'm sorry. Document to bring to a dietitian, where if I wrote this and I was like, if I received this and I didn't know about periodic paralysis, I would think that this is super helpful and kind of gives them a little bit of guidance as to what they're getting themselves into. And so I hope that you can use that as a resource, or even bring it to another doctor or provider that might not know what periodic paralysis is. It's just a super basic overview tailored a little bit to nutrition. So there that is. Talks about what it is, common diagnoses, nutrition goals, how you can help as a dietitian. So I think super practical, super useful, that you could just bring to someone. And I think if they have a willingness to learn and sort of walk around alongside you on this journey, that they will be more than happy to help you kind of figure out your goals. Okay, so I can't see everyone, but for my in-person folks, I'm going to assume that people are just going to raise their hands, and I'm going to pretend to see you, and then we'll just do this whole little thing. Okay, so raise your hand if you use diet as a way to manage your periodic paralysis. And raise your hand if maybe you're not sure how diet impacts your periodic paralysis.
Okay, and Anita, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Okay, so you had, can you raise your hand again if you use diet? So I'd say you got about a half to 2/3 of the room that do, and if you don't, you've got 3 or 4 people. So there's your answer.
There's my answer. Thank you so much for the assistance. Okay. So it sounds like most of you are pretty familiar with diet and dietary triggers, which is awesome. And I think with periodic paralysis, using diet is really a way that you can take some ownership and control back in terms of knowing what your triggers are, how is this going to affect my symptoms, and kind of gets you back a little bit in the driver's seat of your body and your life. Not entirely. Obviously, there's so many factors, but at least in this one area where maybe you can have a little bit of more knowledge, more control on how to best support yourself. So hypokalemic periodic paralysis are caused by a drop of potassium in the blood. Common triggers for symptoms are carbs, salt, eating a large meal, sleep, and exercise. So if eating a large meal is a trigger, you might want to consider like smaller, more frequent meals. And same thing with sleep. If you notice when you wake up in the morning that you're having symptoms, eating a snack before bed that's higher in potassium could help. And same thing with exercise. You just want to make sure you're adequately fueled and hydrated. prior to exercise so your body has everything that it needs, because we know exercise, you sweat, depletes us a little bit. Want to make sure you're going into that with enough fuel. And we'll talk a bit more on carbs and salt coming up. So I'd say the main thing for hypos is really wanting to be mindful of how carbs and salt impact your symptoms and sort of adding in those potassium rich foods when needed. Again, I'm going to say this probably a million times. You guys are going to get so tired of me, but it's so individualized. And so this is why working with a dietitian and working with your doctor to really figure out, this is exactly how many milligrams of salt, exactly how many grams of carbs, and sort of how I need to spread that throughout my day so I can have the least amount of symptoms possible. So this is going to look different for everyone, which is why there's not like specific amounts or anything like that, because it's just so different. You want to choose complex carbs when possible, like those whole grains, high fiber cereals, sweet potatoes, beans, things like that. Those are going to be less of a trigger for your symptoms because they take longer to digest and break down. And if salt is something you're paying attention to, you're going to want to look for items labeled as low sodium or no salt added. I want to be cautious of any food that might be 20% or more of your daily value of sodium. And we're going to talk more about food labels in a minute here. For the hyperkalemic periodic paralysis, I feel like that's a tongue twister. Episodes are caused by too much potassium in the blood. Common triggers are obviously eating foods higher in potassium, skipping meals, strenuous exercise, fatigue, and cold temperatures. So skipping meals can cause a drop in your insulin levels, right? Because you're not giving yourself glucose. And that can cause an excess buildup of potassium in your bloodstream, therefore leading to the high potassium in your blood. Again, some people might be able to go 4 or 5 hours without a meal and be okay. Some people might need to have something every 2 to 3 hours. It really is just going to depend. And same thing with exercise, sort of as I talked about with the hypos, just wanting to be super mindful and making sure you're adequately fueled before, after, with whatever activity you're doing. If it's something new, always taking it slow and sort of building up as your body is able to tolerate it. So for my hyper folks, you want to avoid or limit foods high in potassium, obviously. Again, this is going to vary from person to person. Incorporate more low potassium foods as you can. However, what's a bit different for you is that carbs are actually your friend. And for a lot of people with hyperkalemic periodic paralysis, eating carbs, especially during an episode, can really help their symptoms. So again, that's something that you would sort of have to figure out. Okay, if I'm having a episode, I can have 2 packs of fruit snacks, and that, is enough grams of carbs to sort of bring things back. And again, avoid skipping meals. This is going to also look different from person to person, but really for any human, our body likes routine, our body works on a circadian rhythm. And so keeping things as consistent as possible is just going to help you, feel the best that you can. Cooking methods can also affect potassium levels. If you boil stuff, if you roast stuff, versus if you eat stuff raw, all going to affect what the potassium levels are. So just something to sort of keep in mind, that if you are wanting to have maybe fruit or vegetable a little bit higher in potassium, perhaps cooking it, boiling it, draining it could help a little bit. And yeah, just always plan ahead, be prepared, carry a drink with you, a water, carry a snack with you. I always have a snack on me because I'm notorious for like being in the middle of Marshalls and then getting a low blood sugar and being just like, oh my gosh, now the day is ruined because I feel like crap. So keep a granola bar on you or nuts or, whatever your safe snack is that, you can grab if you need it when you're out. So this slide has a lot of words. I'm not going to read it all, but I just want to throw up here some foods highest in potassium and lowest in potassium. I thought this was actually quite interesting because I know that a lot of the times when we think potassium, we just think of bananas. But there are so many other foods that actually have way more potassium in them than bananas. So bananas are not like the be all end all here. There are other foods to keep in mind. Um, and so something that, you can always reference back to the slide or whatever in the future. But I just thought it was pretty interesting. Same thing with Anderson-Twill syndrome as for the hypers and hypos. It is going to be super individualized of how potassium affects you and your body. Um, some people improve with higher potassium intake while some people make symptoms worse. Super, super individualized as well. Because this is a lot of what I do, I see a lot of people with disordered eating, eating disorders on GLP-1s. I wanted to add this little bit in here, especially with how much we are seeing GLP-1s, Ozempic, all of those things just out there and people talking about it. From my experience, people with chronic illnesses, especially those where you're forced to make dietary changes, are much, much more likely to develop either disordered eating or an eating disorder, or even just have a, not intuitive, not relaxed relationship with food because of how you've had to alter your diet to manage your health condition. Um, and so, again, this is another reason why working with a dietitian and your team, a therapist, just to make sure that you have someone to talk to about these things and you're not feeling like you're in it all by yourself. If a fad diet sounds too good to be true, it probably is. That's a good rule of thumb that I like to go by. If you see something online and it's like eating 10 servings of fruit and vegetables a day cured my insert disease here, probably not true, because if it was, our like multi-billion-dollar diet industry would be out of business. So when I was also researching the GLP-1s and periodic paralysis specifically, I just came across a single case study out there about the use of GLP-1s and periodic paralysis. But again, this is just a one human single case study. So I think the answer is that we really don't know, which is the answer for a lot of questions related to these drugs, is we don't know its impact with different chronic diseases. We don't know its impact, especially long term, on the body of using something like this. So if you are gonna, interested in that, going to try a GLP-1, obviously just wanting to work super, super closely with your healthcare team to monitor everything that goes on when you use one of those. All right. So, reading a food label and what you all need to pay attention to. So, the food label was actually redone by the FDA a few years ago. Just made some more, like, the calories bigger, added, like, I think some vitamins at the bottom. Um, but we're going to focus on the highlighted parts here because that's kind of what's most important for all of you. So, up at the top, we have serving size. This is the FDA's recommended serving size for the food. Um, you know, I have beef with sometimes with the serving sizes. I've yet to meet someone that actually just has like half a cup of Ben and Jerry's, but I can save that rant for a different time. Um, it's okay to eat more than what the serving size says, but what you have to be mindful of is then obviously how it would impact the sodium, carbs, and potassium of that food, right? But if you have a calculator, which we all do on our phones now, pretty easy to calculate. So then we have sodium down here. That's going to be in milligrams. Total grams of carbohydrates, that's going to be here in grams. And then they kind of break it down further into fiber and sugar and added sugar. Not as important as the total carbohydrates. I mean, we care about added sugar and fiber, but again, we're going to just focus on the total here for now. And then at the bottom, we have potassium, which honestly, I'm really glad they added that to the food label because it's super helpful for all of us. So, you guys should all have, in person and virtually, a little worksheet here. And thought we would do a little example. I will give you guys, don't want to waste too much time, like about 30 seconds to do some quick math if you'd like. So if you were to eat 2 servings of the crackers listed here, what would the nutrients be? I'll give you guys a couple seconds to do a little math and then I will give out the answers. Okay. Want to keep us moving here. So, serving size, we would have 32 pieces. I think I took this off of a Wheat Thins box, so like 32 crackers. That would give us 400 milligrams of sodium, 44 grams of carbs, and 180 milligrams of potassium. So, once you sort of know what you're looking for, I feel like the food label is a lot less overwhelming, intimidating, information overload. And eventually you will also just sort of memorize probably your favorite foods and you'll know, like, okay, if I'm going to eat, this many pretzels, this many crackers, this many cookies, this is about how much everything's in there. So it will get easier the more you do it because you'll just convert it to memory. But what if you're eating a food that doesn't have a label? Or what if you're out to eat and you can't measure something using your measuring cups, measuring spoons? There are hand portions. So this is not obviously going to be as exact as using measuring spoons, measuring cups, food scales, etc. But also, we're not going to carry around measuring cups and measuring spoons everywhere all of the time. That would be a little silly. So this is where this comes in really handy. And I will use this a lot with clients in a more practical sense, right? So if we're looking at the palm of your hand, that is about 3 ounces, which is on average for most people a good serving of like chicken, fish, protein. A cupped hand, so that would be like doing like this. I had to figure out what they meant by a cupped hand because that drawing's a little inconspicuous. It's equivalent to about a half cup. So you also could probably think about that as like a small handful. That can be good for things like pastas, nuts. Don't know who's like cupping ice cream like this, but I guess you could use that for that too. The tip of your thumb up here is about a tablespoon, so that can be helpful for things like peanut butter, butter, cheese. Your fist is about a cup, and so that can be good for measuring things like rice, pastas, fruits, cereals. So it's about a cup. And then some other ways of measuring. A deck of cards is about 3 ounces of protein, so similar to the palm. For me, the balls aren't super useful because if you asked me the difference between a softball and a baseball, I would not be able to tell you. But for some people that know their sports and balls really well, that is helpful. Um, so this is a quick little tool that you can have. And obviously, someone who is like 6'7" is gonna have a very different hand size than my 5'3" like girl hand. But we're best estimating here, right? If you're in a restaurant or at a friend's house and don't have access to like measure it as a quick tool, but not exact. All right. Another question for you guys. Who here has kept a food diary before? So there are a lot of apps out there. You can use good old pen and paper. You can also use like an Excel sheet. I have a lot of the times people use the notes app of their phones. There's all different ways to keep a food diary. You need to find what's going to be most practical and realistic for you because not everyone, life is the same. And so some people, pen and paper might work great. But if you're on the move a lot or not going to remember to take that with you, using something on your phone might be better. So I made a super simple food diary guide that you all should have also. Both like I have one with examples and then I have a blank one so that you can practice. You want to make it as detailed as you can because the more details you're able to provide, the more information it's going to tell your doctor, your dietitian, you, right? And so this isn't something you're going to have to do all of the time, but if you're in a process of sort of figuring out your triggers, your symptoms, etc., trying to get as exact as you can. So like, one piece of toast with butter, was it about a tablespoon of butter? I should have done that. Or was it a teaspoon of butter, right? Did you add jam? Like wanting to just add all of those even tiny details just so you get the most accurate picture possible. Obviously wanting to put the time, record any symptoms, record any medications, and then any other just like factors or things that could be going on. And so for this example, they had breakfast, this person had lunch, and an afternoon snack, dinner, and a bedtime snack. Nope. Yeah, so here's an example of the blank one. I know you guys are all gonna have lunch pretty soon, and so that could be a good opportunity to practice this and seeing how that feels, seeing how that goes, recording your symptoms, trying to maybe use those hand portions a little bit and trying to estimate about how much you're having. But I'd say this is like probably the main tool that I use with people is a food diary because whether we're trying to figure out like symptoms related to periodic paralysis, symptoms related to like a food allergy or intolerance, this is the best way to do it because your dietitian, your doctor, whoever isn't going to be next to you for every meal and snack, right? So having this guide to bring is super helpful. So a few tips and tricks. Like I said, for those with hypo, it's important to figure out how many grams of carbs and how many milligrams of sodium you can safely tolerate in a day. You might have to spread it out evenly throughout the day, or maybe it's really hard for you to tolerate lots of carbs in the morning, but you do better off with carbs later in the day. So maybe having like a super high protein breakfast and then having your carbs with lunch and dinner maybe work better. Or maybe you just need to have a pretty exact amount of carbs throughout the day. It's going to really vary. We have to just sort of embrace the trial and error it's going to happen. That is how you are going to figure out what is going to best work for you. Using swaps and additions where you can be super helpful. So like adding protein powder to things. I feel like they like to add protein to a lot of things. I think I just saw Starbucks is doing like a protein coffee, which I don't really know how I feel about that. I think I just like my coffee plain. But anywho, people add protein powder to like pancake mix or muffin mix. And that's a way that you can have your carb and also get your protein. And so hopefully that doesn't trigger as much as if you were just eating the carb alone. Mixing like zucchini noodles and with regular noodles if you're having pasta. Same thing with like rice, doing like 50% cauliflower rice, 50% regular rice. There's a lot of creative ways that, again, working with a dietitian, you will be able to really figure out things that you can try. And it's pretty exciting to be able to get some of maybe your favorite foods back that you've not been able to eat. And whenever you're trying something new, as I said, you want to start slow and small because we don't know how these things are going to impact you or how sensitive maybe your system is. You want to start small, you want to start slow, kind of like a medication, right? We wouldn't want to start with like the highest dose possible. We'd want to start with like the absolute lowest dose. And then for me, I personally do half of that even because you just don't know how your body is going to react. And diet might even differ between family members. I know obviously there's a high genetic component with periodic paralysis. So even like a mom and son could have very different triggers, different amounts of sodium and carbs and potassium they can tolerate. And so it's unfortunately not one of those things where like, it works for me, it should work for you. Super individualized. And I know I'm at 30 minutes here. We're gonna go quick. For the days where you have low spoons or in a flare up, make sure to have easy to eat food stocked up at home, using things like DoorDash or Uber Eats, using things like Instacart to get some groceries delivered. Obviously, with the caveat of checking the carbs and salt and potassium in these foods to make sure they are safe for you to eat. But it's okay to use these things. These are tools and resources that we have that can be really helpful so you don't have to suffer and just not eat if you're not able to get up and prepare yourself food. There's also meal kit services like HelloFresh, CookUnity that also can deliver food. Just always be checking, the carbs, sodium, potassium. Make sure it's something that's going to work for you. So advocating when you're out to eat. Going out to eat when you have food restrictions can be scary and can make you really just not want to go. But then you're missing out on life and you'll have FOMO. And you want to be able to go to your favorite restaurants and go out with your friends or on date night or whatever, right? So there is a way that you can do this. Checking the menu online beforehand can be really helpful to sort of have an idea of, okay, does this place even have a couple things I could order? You can also call ahead, ask to speak to a manager or a chef if you have more specific questions. And then picking the right restaurant or the right cuisine that maybe just naturally in that cuisine offers lower, higher potassium or carby type foods, right? Like Mexican might be a good example where, you can get stuff that has carbs, but also you can get stuff that doesn't just have carbs, whereas like pizza might be a little bit harder, right, to do that. At the restaurant, you want to state your needs clearly, not having to apologize, using words like I can't instead of I don't want to. Keeping it simple, focusing on the top couple things you absolutely have to avoid or change. We don't want to give them like a 10 food long list of things because that's just going to be overwhelming and too much, but more so like what are the make it or break it things that you need the info on. And then also asking about preparation because, sometimes is this cooked in like salted butter? There's little ways that things can be added that you might not realize. And you don't have to feel bad about advocating for yourself or your food allergies, because I think now more than ever, this is also just super, super common. And a lot of people deal with food allergies and sensitivities. So restaurants are super used to getting this all of the time. Um, and so on the next slide here, this is the last handout. I know I gave you guys like a lot of handouts. I apologize. But I have some clients that will utilize a food allergy card. And so you can sort of write down, say you have a peanut allergy and you also need your meal to be under 500 milligrams of sodium. You could write that on here, right? And that way, either you could give it to them or you can just have that so you don't have to think on the spot, and just keep it with you in your purse or wallet. And at a restaurant, you can always ask for like plain or grilled versions of things. Like, just, can I have some grilled chicken and steamed veggies? Most restaurants are going to be able to do that. And I heard Disney's pretty allergy friendly. So if you guys are planning on going there, could be a good place to practice. My references. And thank you guys. I hope that this felt helpful.
All right. Thank you, Anita. And I know that we want to leave your info up there for a little bit, but if it's also helpful to go full screen again, that might be great as we ask some questions and then everybody can see you more clearly. So we do have some questions that are in the app. And for those that are looking for the documents that Anita was describing, so if you have the Whova app or on your laptop, you'll go to the kind of home screen and then down under other resources, documents. And so there's a whole host of things still to discover. So thanks for that, Anita. Questions in the room, please let me know. Yep, we'll come. And then I'll ask some that we've had voted and upvoted here. Anita, one of our questioners asked, how does dehydration affect periodic paralysis symptoms, especially for hyperkalemic?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, dehydration for people without periodic paralysis can cause a whole host of symptoms, right? And so I think it can get a little tricky. Obviously, we have plain water that hydrates us, but nowadays we also have all of these like electrolyte beverages, which are loaded with salt and potassium and carbs. And so, if you're looking for any of those things to like help rehydrate yourself, you just are going to want to be really careful and look for something that is going to work for you. Again, start slow and try something. Even things like Pedialyte all have like carbs, salt, potassium, which really help us get hydrated, but obviously can also trigger symptoms. And so, for someone with hyperkalemic periodic paralysis with getting dehydrated, I'd imagine that you'd actually like want to have those carbs, so that sugar in those beverages, to help both your hyperkalemic symptoms, but also help you hydrate a bit faster, because our body absorbs fluid a bit faster when we have glucose with it as well.
Hi there. I have a question on the case study that you were referring to on the GLP-1. I'm actually going to start my first dose of that when we get back next week. I'm hypo to normal. We live in Kentucky, suffering from moderate attacks just about daily to severe attacks monthly that require hospitalization to 3 to 5 days, with probably 2 to 10 bags of potassium over that length of time to even get back to normal. So we have been working on this GLP-1. Now, I'm not a diabetic. So is there any precautions or anything that I need to do to maybe safeguard from dropping those levels in the wrong direction, or any cautions?
Yeah, no, that's an excellent question. Obviously, I don't know the exact drug dose, all of those things. But I'd say my off the bat advice is that sort of like I would tell anyone, even without periodic paralysis, when you're starting this medication, it can really affect your appetite. It can cause nausea. It can cause early satiety. And so all of those things obviously impact the way that you consume food. And so wanting to just probably pay really, really close attention to if you notice like you are eating less, you are drinking less, because that is going to affect how much you're able to eat and therefore, right, how much food you're taking in, and then how are your potassium levels going to respond to that. And so I think just taking extra caution, and if you are noticing like those symptoms of nausea or not eating as much as you used to, like I think bringing that to the doctor right away instead of maybe waiting like your average patient would, just because you're going to want to monitor those side effects really carefully.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah. I wish we had more info, but we don't yet.
Yeah, and Anita, I wish we had more time because we definitely would love to do that. I've just been told we're at time. We're a couple minutes over. So thank you so much for beaming in and coming to see us. And we hope you're on the mend. I know you were trying to be here live, so thank you for making the extra effort to be here. So another round of applause, please, for Anita. Fantastic.
Thank
Yep. And
you for having me, and I hope you guys enjoy the rest of the conference.
all right. Thanks, Anita. And for our